Clouds. After every storm, Ethan declared, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. The sun will always rise. And with it, a new day, a new beginning, a new hope. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you love the most? This video will stir your mind, uncovering the dark corners that seem to have slept in every family. Don't look away, because this story will not only make you angry, but also touch the most vulnerable place in your heart. Watch until the end, because you will want to express your feelings. And don't hesitate to comment below, share your own story, or simply leave a sentence. I was like that. My name is Lucas Bennett, and I grew up in a small town just outside of Calgary, Alberta. My parents split up when I was 9, and it was tough, but they both made sure I felt loved. Mom lived in the city near my school, so I stayed with her during the week. Dad lived out in the countryside, and I'd spend weekends with him, riding bikes through the fields or fishing by the creek. Even though they weren't together, they were always kind to me, and I got used to the back-and-forth life. A couple of years later, when I was 11, Dad met a woman named Cheryl. She seemed nice enough at first, warm smile, soft voice, and Dad was over the moon about her. He brought her over one Saturday, hoping we'd hit it off. Cheryl had twin daughters, Sophie and Chloe, who were 14. They didn't have a dad around, and it showed. They'd scream and stomp their feet in public if they didn't get what they wanted, like spoiled kids half their age. I'm quiet by nature, so I just watched them, keeping my thoughts to myself. After a year of dating, Dad and Cheryl tied the knot. I was 12 then, and even Mom showed up to the wedding, clapping politely from the back. I was excited at first, thinking I'd get a bigger family out of it. Cheryl and I seemed to get along okay in the beginning. She'd ask me about school, and I'd answer politely. But a few months after their honeymoon, everything changed. One morning, while Dad was out feeding the horses, Cheryl cornered me in the kitchen. She leaned in close, her voice low and sharp, and said, "Look, Lucas, I don't like you. You remind me too much of your mom. We'll pretend to get along when your dad's around, but when he's not, you stay out of my way." Got it? I froze, my stomach twisting. I'd liked her, or at least tried to, and her words hit me like a slap. I nodded, too stunned to argue. Later that day, Sophie and Chloe overheard her and started taunting me, saying Dad loved them more, that I was just a burden. I ran to my room, tears stinging my eyes, and called Mom. She was furious and phoned Dad right away, yelling about what Cheryl had said. Dad brushed it off, insisting I'd misunderstood, that Cheryl would never be so cruel. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I'd heard. The next weekend, when I went back to Dad's, Cheryl was cold as ice when he wasn't looking. The second he stepped outside, she grabbed my arm and hissed, "If you ever tell your mom about me again, I'll make sure you lose your dad for good. I'll divorce him, take every penny he's got, and leave him with nothing. You want that on your conscience?" Her eyes were wild, and at 12, I was terrified. I nodded again, my throat tight. From then on, she made my life a nightmare whenever we were alone. She'd mock my skinny frame, calling me a twig, or say my acne made me look like a freak. I'd bite my tongue, hoping she'd get tired of it, but she never did. Dad didn't see any of it. He thought we were one big happy family. He'd drag me along on shopping trips with Cheryl and the twins, her using his credit card to buy them piles of clothes and fancy dinners. Me? I'd get a bowl of soup or a stale muffin while they feasted on steak and fries. I'd sit there, stomach growling, tears slipping down my cheeks, but Cheryl would glare at me until I shut up. At home, she'd send me to bed hungry, saying I didn't deserve more. I'd lie awake, crying into my pillow, wondering why Dad couldn't see what was happening. Weekends with Dad became something I dreaded. I'd fake colds or stomach aches to stay with Mom, but they started catching on. Dad would call, his voice heavy with guilt, asking why I didn't want to see him. Mom would press me to tell her what was wrong, but Cheryl's threats echoed in my head, so I kept quiet. When I was 14, Dad planned a family trip to Banff National Park. I didn't want to go, but Mom convinced me it'd be a chance to see the mountains, so I gave in. Cheryl played her part perfectly in front of Dad, asking about my hockey games with a fake smile. But the second he turned away, she'd jab at me with sly little digs, like saying I'd never make the team, because I wasn't tough enough. Sophie and Chloe joined in, calling me Puckhead even though I'd scored more goals than their boyfriends ever had. Dad noticed sometimes, but brushed it off. As teasing, one day by Lake Louise they pushed too far. Cheryl smirked and said I'd sink the canoe with my scrawny weight, and the twins cackled. I snapped. I turned to the twins and said, "Maybe if you didn't eat so many burgers, you wouldn't wobble when you walk." Then I looked at Cheryl and added, "And you should skip the swimsuit, those rolls don't hide under a towel." Her face went red as a beet, and she stormed off to the hotel. The twins shrieked, calling me a jerk, and Dad hauled me aside later, furious. He lectured me about respect, saying he'd raised me better than to talk about a woman's looks. I tried explaining they'd been tearing into me first, but he wouldn't hear it. He made me apologize, and Cheryl milked it, sobbing like I'd broken her heart. After that, she stopped talking to me outright when Dad wasn't around, which was fine by me. The twins followed her lead, pretending I didn't exist. When I was 16, Mom went on a work trip, so I had to stay at Dad's for a week. Cheryl griped about cooking for an extra mouth, so on the last night, I made dinner myself. Mom had taught me how to grill a mean steak. Cheryl invited her friends over when she heard, probably hoping I'd mess up. But the food was a hit: juicy steaks, mashed potatoes, the works. Everyone raved about it, even Dad, who insisted on doing the dishes. I went to my room, feeling good for once, until I overheard Cheryl outside with her friends. They were gushing about how lucky she was, nice house, sweet husband, talented kid. She cut them off mid-sentence, snarling, "Lucky? I can't stand that little creep. I'm counting the days till he's 18 and out of my hair." When a friend said I seemed nice, Cheryl laughed bitterly. I was praying he'd burn the damn steaks so I could rip him apart. My chest tightened. Even when I tried, she hated me. By the time I hit college, her dislike was a full-blown grudge. When I'd visit Dad during breaks, she'd plan outings just for him, her, and the twins, leaving me behind. If I slept in, she'd barge into my room, screaming that I was a lazy slob, even though I always tidied up. She'd rummage through my stuff under my bed, in my bags, like she was hunting for dirt. She'd order takeout for everyone but me, smirking as I sat there with nothing. I kept my head down, stayed polite, and focused on time with Dad when I could get it. Then came my 21st birthday. Dad called, saying he had big news and wanted me over for dinner. It had been months since I'd last visited, and I hesitated, but Mom pushed me to go, saying it sounded important. I booked a flight from Vancouver, where I was studying, back to Calgary. Dad picked me up at the airport, grinning ear to ear, but he wouldn't spill the news until dinner. When we got to the house, Sophie and Chloe were there, ignoring me as usual. That night, Dad stood up at the table, beaming. He said he was proud of his 3 kids, me, Sophie, and Chloe, and grateful for his family. He'd lost a buddy to a heart attack recently, and it got him thinking about the future. He'd seen a lawyer and made a will. Cheryl and the twins perked up at that word will. Dad explained he was leaving the house to Cheryl since she was his wife. It was a big place, 5 bedrooms, worth a fortune if she ever sold it. She kissed his cheek, glowing. Then he turned to me and said he was giving me his retirement savings and his old Mustang, the one we'd spent hours tinkering on together. That car was his pride and joy, full of stories from his wild days, and I knew it was his way of showing he cared. I was floored, but Cheryl's smile vanished. She shot the twins a look, and they scowled back. Dad kept going, oblivious, saying the joint account he shared with Cheryl would go to Sophie and Chloe, split even. It was all his money since she didn't work, and he figured it'd set them up with the house. I thought it was fair, more than fair, but the twins whined instantly. "That's it?" Sophie snapped. "We thought we'd get the retirement fund, too." Chloe nodded, saying I didn't need it anyway. Dad frowned, confused, but Cheryl jumped in. "They're right. Lucas is a guy he can figure things out. Girls need more to feel secure." Dad pushed back, pointing out he'd already paid for their college, and now they had a house and cash. Cheryl wouldn't let it go, insisting I didn't deserve so much. Dad shut it down, voice firm, saying his decision was final. I stayed quiet, watching the tension bubble. Then Cheryl exploded into tears, startling everyone. Dad tried to calm her, asking what was wrong, assuring her everything was split evenly. Between sobs, she choked out, "I've kept quiet for years to protect this family, but I can't anymore." The room went dead silent. Dad and I swapped puzzled glances as she wiped her eyes and launched into her story. "A few years back," she said, voice trembling, "Lucas tried to force himself on me. I hid it to shield him." My jaw dropped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Before I could even process it, she kept going, spinning a tale straight out of a horror movie. She claimed it started after that Banff trip, when we'd argued. Said I'd leer at her, try to sneak into her room, even corner her after showers. She swore she lived in fear every weekend I came over, worried I'd go after the twins next. I found my voice and shouted, "That's a lie! You're insane!" But she just cried harder, playing the victim like a pro. She told Dad I'd gotten worse as I grew up. That once, when we were alone, I'd pinned her down and tried to assault her. My heart pounded so hard I thought it had burst. I screamed that I'd never touched her, never even thought about it, but she wailed over me, saying she'd exposed a monster. The twins piled on, shrieking that I'd traumatized their mom, calling me a predator. I looked to Dad, begging him to see the truth, but he just sat there, eyes wide, lost. He asked Cheryl if it was real, and she nodded, swearing she'd never lie about his son. "You have to believe me, I'm your wife," she pleaded. I was sobbing now, begging Dad not to buy it, but the twins kept yelling, demanding I get out. I shouted back that it was Dad's house, not theirs, but he finally spoke. "Lucas, go," he said, voice flat. "We'll sort this out later." It felt like he'd stabbed me. My own dad, picking her over me without a shred of proof. I grabbed my stuff, hands shaking, and flew back to Mom's. When I told her everything, she nearly lost it, ready to drive over and confront Cheryl herself. I begged her to stop. Cheryl was unhinged, and I didn't know what she'd do next. I decided then and there to cut Dad off for good. If he could ditch me that fast, he didn't deserve me. Mom said Dad called her later, ranting about how ashamed he was of me, saying he was done with me too. She tried to set him straight, but he wouldn't listen. His family bought Cheryl's story hook, line, and sinker, even calling Mom to blame her for raising a sicko. It killed me to see her hurt like that. Cheryl and the twins didn't stop either. They blew up my phone with threats, telling me to stay away forever. I changed my number, but the damage was done. I spiraled hard after that, terrified of being near women, scared I'd be accused again and lose everything: my job, my future. I stopped dating, stopped trusting people. Mom was my rock, moving in with me for a while when I hit rock bottom, pulling me back from the edge. Slowly, I started healing. Then I met Sarah, this amazing woman who brought light back into my life. She's kind, funny, and Mom loves her like a daughter. They're my world now. Last week, my phone rang an unknown number. I picked up thinking it was a delivery guy, but it was Dad. His voice was shaky, older than I remembered. After 7 years, I didn't know what to say. I asked how he got my number, but he dodged it, asking if I was okay. I told him to leave me alone, but he broke down, crying, begging me to forgive him. He said he'd been wrong to turn his back on me. I stayed silent, letting him talk. He spilled it all. Cheryl had been cheating with his best friend for years. When he caught her, she admitted she'd married him for money, that she despised him. And then the kicker, she confessed she'd made up every word about me to cut me out of the will, to keep it all for her and the twins. Dad divorced her, and she walked away with nothing thanks to the affair. He said he'd waited till she was gone to reach out, that he wanted to fix things, be a father again. I laughed cold and bitter and told him he'd lost that title when he chose her lies over me. I hung up, but he kept calling. His family too, saying I was cruel, that he'd suffered enough. It messed with my head, but I held firm. A week later, I flew Mom out to Vancouver. I sat her and Sarah down and told them everything, not just Dad's call, but all of it. How Cheryl had tormented me since I was 12, the blackmail, the insults, the hunger. I broke down, tears pouring out, and they cried with me. Mom held me tight, saying I should have told her sooner, that no kid should have faced that alone. Sarah said Dad failed me, that I owed him nothing. They were right, he only wanted me back because he was alone now, not because he cared then. I blocked him, blocked them all, and felt free for the first time in years. 6 months later, life's brighter. I proposed to Sarah, she said yes, and Mom's over the moon. We're thinking of moving near her in Victoria, where the schools are great for the kids we hope to have. Therapy's helping too, peeling back the scars bit by bit. Cheryl's gone, Dad's gone, and I've got Sarah and Mom, the family that never gave up on me. I'm done looking back. Life in Vancouver with Sarah felt like a fresh start, but the past has a way of creeping back when you least expect it. A few months after the proposal, we were knee-deep in wedding plans, picking out venues, arguing over cake flavors, the usual stuff. Mom was thrilled, calling every other day with ideas about flowers or guest lists. I'd started therapy too, and it was working. The nightmares about Cheryl's lies were fading, and I wasn't jumping at shadows anymore. Sarah and I even found a little house near the water we were eyeing, something we could grow into. Everything was falling into place, or so I thought. One rainy afternoon, I was at the grocery store grabbing stuff for dinner, when my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. I almost ignored it. Spam calls were a dime a dozen, but something made me pick up. "Lucas!" A voice rasped on the other end. It was Dad again. My stomach dropped. "I told you not to call me," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hands were already shaking. He didn't apologize this time. Instead, he said, "I'm in Vancouver. I need to see you. It's urgent." I gripped the cart so hard my knuckles turned white. "No chance!" I snapped, ready to hang up. But he cut in. "It's about Cheryl. She's coming for you." That stopped me cold. I stood there, rain hammering the roof, as he kept talking. "She's lost everything, her house, her friends, me. She blames you. I heard from a buddy she's been asking around, trying to find where you are. She's unhinged, Lucas. I'm scared of what she might do." I didn't want to believe him. Cheryl was out of my life, a bad memory I'd buried. But the way his voice cracked, the panic in it, gnawed at me. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. He sighed, heavy and tired. "You shouldn't. I failed you, I know that. But if I can do one thing right, it's warning you. She's got nothing left to lose." I hung up without another word, my mind racing. Was this some trick to worm his way back in, or was he telling the truth? I paid for the groceries and drove home, the wipers slashing through the downpour. But all I could see was Cheryl's face, those wild eyes from years ago, promising to ruin me. When I told Sarah, she didn't hesitate. "We need to take this seriously," she said, setting down her coffee mug with a thud. "If she's as crazy as you say, we can't risk it." Mom agreed when I called her later that night. "That woman's a snake, Lucas. You need to protect yourself." The next day, we went to the police. I laid it all out, the years of harassment, the fake assault story, Dad's warning. The officer, a gruff guy named Peterson, took notes, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. "No concrete threats yet," he said, "but I'll file a report. Keep your doors locked and call us if she shows up." It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah and I installed a security system that weekend cameras, motion lights, the works. I hated feeling like I was hiding, but I wasn't taking chances. Weeks passed, and nothing happened. No Cheryl, no calls, just wedding plans and work. I started to think Dad was full of it, stirring drama to get my attention. Then one night, I woke up to the alarm blaring. Sarah bolted upright beside me, her eyes wide. "What's that?" she whispered. I grabbed my phone 2:37 a.m. and checked the camera feed. There, in grainy black and white, was a figure standing in our driveway. Hood up, face shadowed, but the way they moved, slow and deliberate, sent a chill down my spine. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told them someone was outside. The figure lingered for a minute, then vanished into the dark just as headlights flashed down the street. By the time the cops arrived, they were gone. Peterson came by the next morning, reviewing the footage. "Can't ID them," he said, "but we'll patrol the area. You see anything else? You call me direct." I barely slept after that. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, had me on edge. Sarah stayed calm, but I could tell she was rattled too. Then, 2 days later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo of me, walking out of the grocery store that rainy day. No message, just the image. My blood ran cold. I showed it to Sarah, and she grabbed her keys. "We're going to the cops." Now Peterson's jaw tightened when he saw it. "Stalking behavior," he said. "We'll trace the number, but it's probably a burner. You got any enemies besides this Cheryl?" I shook my head. "Just her." He nodded. "Then we'll start there." The trace didn't turn up much, just a prepaid phone bought in Calgary, but Peterson dug deeper. He called me a week later with news. Found her. Cheryl's been living in a rundown motel outside the city. Neighbors say she's been ranting about some kid who ruined her life. We're bringing her in for questioning. Relief hit me, but it was short-lived. That night, Dad showed up at our door. Sarah answered, and I heard her yell, "Lucas, get down here." He looked awful gray hair, sunken eyes, like he'd aged 20 years. "I tracked her down," he said, voice hoarse. "I've been following her, trying to stop her before she got to you. She's lost it, son. She's got a knife, talks about making you pay." I stared at him, torn between rage and fear. "Why are you here?" I demanded. "I don't need you playing hero now." He flinched. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I couldn't let her hurt you again." Before I could answer, tires screeched outside. Sarah peeked through the blinds and gasped. "Lucas, it's her!" I looked out Cheryl, storming up the walkway, her face twisted with fury, something glinting in her hand. Dad shoved past me, shouting, "Stay back!" He met her halfway, grabbing her arm as she swung at him. They grappled, a chaotic blur, and I ran out, Sarah yelling for me to stop. Cheryl screamed, "You took everything, you little bastard!" As Dad wrestled the knife free, it clattered to the pavement just as sirens wailed in the distance. Peterson and 2 officers pulled up, guns drawn, hauling Cheryl off Dad. She thrashed, spitting curses, but they cuffed her and shoved her into the cruiser. Dad slumped against the porch, breathing hard, a cut on his arm dripping blood. I stood there, heart pounding, as Sarah called an ambulance. "You okay?" I muttered, not sure what else to say. He nodded weakly. I had to do something right for once. The paramedics patched him up while Peterson took my statement. Cheryl was charged with stalking, assault, and a slew of other things. She'd been tailing me for weeks, fueled by spite and a twisted need for revenge. Dad's warning and his showing up had probably saved us. After that, I didn't know what to feel. Dad lingered in Vancouver, asking to talk, but I wasn't ready. Sarah and Mom both said it was my call, no pressure. Therapy helped me sort through it, the anger, the betrayal, the tiny flicker of gratitude I couldn't shake. Cheryl's trial came fast. She pleaded guilty, got 5 years, and I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to see her face again. Dad stayed in town, renting a cheap apartment, sending texts I didn't answer. One day, he left a voicemail. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Lucas. I just want you to know I'm proud of the man you've become despite me." I deleted it, but it stuck with me. Sarah and I got married that summer, a small ceremony by the coast. Mom walked me down the aisle, beaming, and Dad wasn't invited. We moved to Victoria a year later, closer to Mom, and bought that house we'd dreamed of. I still see my therapist, still flinch at unknown numbers, but I'm okay, better than okay. Sarah's pregnant now, a girl, and we're naming her Lily, after Mom. Dad's out there somewhere, and maybe one day I'll call him. Maybe. But for now, I've got my family, the one that fought for me when it mattered most, and that's enough. Settling into Victoria felt like turning a page. The house we bought was a cozy 2-story with a wraparound porch, just a few blocks from the ocean. Sarah's belly grew rounder by the day, and we spent evenings painting the nursery soft yellow, arguing over cribs, and laughing about how unprepared we felt. Mom moved nearby, into a little condo with a view of the harbor, and she'd drop by with casseroles or baby clothes she couldn't resist buying. Work was steady. I'd landed a remote gig with a tech firm out of Toronto, and Sarah was freelancing as a graphic designer. Life was quiet, steady, the kind of peace I'd craved after all the chaos. But peace, I learned, doesn't always last. It started with the mail. One crisp October morning, I grabbed a stack from the box and flipped through it bills, a wedding thank you card, and then a plain envelope with no return address. My name was scrawled across it in jagged handwriting I didn't recognize. I tore it open, figuring it was junk, but inside was a single sheet of paper. "You think you're safe?" it read. "I'll find you." No signature, just those words, sharp and black. My hands went cold. I showed it to Sarah, who frowned, her fingers tightening on her coffee mug. "Cheryl?" she asked. I shook my head, uncertain. "She's locked up. 3 years left at least." But the doubt gnawed at me. I called Peterson, who'd transferred to a precinct in Victoria a while back. He came by that afternoon, squinting at the note through his glasses. "Could be a prank," he said. "But with your history, we'll check it out. Send it for prints." The lab found nothing, no prints, no DNA, just cheap paper you could buy anywhere. Peterson called Cheryl's prison to confirm she was still there. No recent visitors, no mail privileges. "Doesn't mean she couldn't have someone on the outside," he warned. "Keep an eye out." I nodded, but the unease settled in like damp rot. Sarah and I double-checked the locks, set the cameras to record 24/7, and tried to push it aside. Lily was due in a month, and we didn't want this shadow hanging over us. Then, a week later, it escalated. I was walking Mom home from our place after dinner when I noticed a car idling across the street, a beat-up gray sedan, windows tinted dark. The engine revved as we passed, then peeled off. Mom grabbed my arm, her voice shaky. "Did you see that?" I nodded, my gut twisting. It could have been nothing, just some jerk showing off, but it didn't feel that way. The next day, I found a rock in our yard, big, fist-sized, with "Watch Your Back" scratched into it. I didn't tell Sarah right away. She was already on edge, waddling around with swollen ankles, but I called Peterson. He came over, bagged the rock, and upped the patrols around our block. "This is personal," he said, his jaw tight. "Someone's got a grudge." I racked my brain. Cheryl was the obvious suspect. But who else? The twins, Sophie and Chloe, crossed my mind. They'd hated me as much as their mom, and I hadn't heard a peep from them since the divorce. Could they be unhinged enough to pick up where Cheryl left off? I gave Peterson their names, and he promised to dig into it. 2 nights later, Sarah woke me up, her voice trembling. "Lucas, the camera's off." I bolted upright, checked my phone. The feed was black. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept downstairs, Sarah whispering for me to be careful. The back door was ajar, the lock jimmied. My heart hammered as I swept the house, nothing missing, no one there, but muddy footprints smeared the kitchen floor. I called the cops while Sarah huddled on the couch, clutching her phone. Peterson arrived with a forensics team, dusting for prints, taking photos. "Whoever it was," he said, "they're getting bold." The prints didn't match Cheryl's, but they couldn't rule out a hired hand. I barely slept that night, sitting by the window with the bat across my lap, watching the street. Lily arrived 3 weeks later, a screaming, perfect little thing with Sarah's eyes. Holding her, I felt a fierce need to keep her safe, to make sure she'd never know the fear I'd lived with. But the threats didn't stop. A dead bird showed up on our porch, wings splayed, neck snapped. Then a voicemail from a distorted voice. "You can't hide forever." Peterson traced it to a burner phone bought in Nanaimo, but the trail went cold. Sarah begged me to move, to leave Victoria, but I couldn't uproot us, not with a newborn, not when we'd fought so hard for this life. Mom suggested hiring a private investigator, and I agreed. A guy named Hayes, ex-cop with a scar across his cheek, took the case. He didn't mess around, tracked down Sophie and Chloe within a week. They were living in Edmonton, broke and bitter, working odd jobs. Hayes tailed them, but they seemed clean, no trips to Victoria, no shady contacts. Doesn't mean they're innocent, he growled. Could be pulling strings. Then Dad called again. I'd unblocked him after Lily was born, figuring he deserved to know he was a grandpa, even if I kept him at arm's length. Lucas, he said, voice rough. I heard about the trouble. It's Sophie. She's been calling me, drunk, ranting about you. Says you ruined her life, took what was hers. My pulse spiked. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded. He hesitated. Didn't want to stir things up. But she's dangerous, son. She's got her mom's temper and worse. I hung up, furious, and called Hayes. He pivoted to Sophie, digging deeper. 2 days later, he had something. A grainy photo from a gas station camera in Victoria, time-stamped the night our door was breached. Sophie, hood up, buying a pack of smokes. My stomach lurched. It was her. Peterson moved fast, issuing a warrant. They picked Sophie up at a dive bar in Nanaimo, strung out and raging. She didn't deny it, spat out a confession like venom. She'd blamed me for everything, Cheryl's downfall, their lost inheritance, her miserable life. She'd tracked me through Dad's old contacts, sent the notes, the rock, the bird. The break-in? She'd wanted to scare us, maybe worse. Chloe wasn't involved, just too lazy to care, Sophie sneered. They charged her with stalking, breaking and entering, and harassment. She got 7 years, no parole for 4. Hayes stuck around till the trial, making sure she didn't slip through the cracks. Dad showed up after it was over, uninvited, standing on our porch with a stuffed bear for Lily. Sarah let him in, her face tight, and I didn't stop her. He looked wrecked thin, hollowed out. I should have stopped this, he said, staring at the floor. Sophie, Cheryl, all of it. I let you down again. I didn't argue. Part of me wanted to scream, to shove him out, but Lily was cooing in her bouncer, and I couldn't find the energy to hate him anymore. You don't get to waltz back in, I said, but you can stay for coffee. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and sat quietly while Sarah brewed a pot. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. Life settled again, slowly. Sophie was gone, Cheryl was irrelevant, and the cameras stayed quiet. Lily started crawling, giggling at everything, and Sarah and I found our rhythm as parents. Mom threw a first birthday party for her, balloons and cake everywhere, and Dad came invited this time. He's not my father, not the way he used to be, but he's trying. I let him hold Lily, watched her grab his finger, and felt the past loosen its grip, just a little. We're staying in Victoria, building our life brick by brick. The scars are there, but they're fading, and with Sarah, Lily, and Mom beside me, I know I'm not running anymore. This is home. Victoria became our sanctuary, but even the quietest places can hide storms. Lily turned 2 last month, a whirlwind of curls and chatter, and Sarah and I were finally hitting our stride as a family. The house felt alive, her toys scattered across the living room, finger paintings taped to the fridge. Mom was over all the time, teaching Lily how to bake cookies, her laughter bouncing off the walls. Work was good too. I'd gotten a promotion, and Sarah's design business was picking up clients left and right. We even talked about a second kid, maybe a boy this time, to round out the chaos. Dad was a fixture now, not close, but steady, showing up for birthdays and holidays with a shy smile and a gift. I kept him at a distance, but Lily adored her Poppy, and that softened the edges of my resentment. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then the letters started again. The first one came on a Monday, tucked in with the usual junk mail. Same jagged handwriting, same cheap paper. You can't keep me out. My chest tightened, but I didn't panic, not yet. Sophie was still in prison, and Cheryl's parole was years away. I figured it was a copycat, some creep who'd heard the story through the grapevine. I called Peterson anyway, and he swung by after his shift, sipping coffee while he read it. Could be nothing, he said, scratching his chin. But let's not take chances. He sent it for analysis, another dead end. No prints, no clues. Sarah wasn't as calm. This isn't random, Lucas, she said, pacing the kitchen. Someone's watching us. I wanted to argue, to tell her we were safe now, but the doubt crept in, cold and familiar. A week later, the second letter arrived. Your little girl's cute. Be a shame if something happened. That one hit different. I didn't show it to Sarah, just stuffed it in my desk and called Hayes. He was on a case in Kelowna, but dropped everything when I told him about Lily. I'm on the next ferry, he said, voice clipped. Lock it down till I get there. I told Sarah we were upgrading security, new locks, better cameras, and she didn't question it, though her eyes searched mine for answers I wouldn't give. Hayes showed up the next day, scar glinting under the porch light, and got to work. He pulled prison records. Sophie was still inside, no contact with the outside world. Cheryl was a ghost, stuck in a halfway house up north with no resources to pull this off. Could be one of their old cronies, Hayes mused, tapping his pen. Or someone new. You piss anybody off lately? I hadn't. Life had been too smooth for enemies until now. The third letter came 3 days later, slipped under the door while we slept. I'm closer than you think. The cameras caught nothing, no shadowy figure, no car. Just static for 10 minutes before the feed kicked back on. Hayes cursed when he saw it. Their good tampered with the system. Peterson beefed up patrols, and Hayes started sleeping on our couch, a gun under the pillow. Sarah was a wreck, barely eating, jumping at every noise. I tried to hold it together for her and Lily, but the fear was eating me alive. Who was this? Why now? Then Lily's daycare called. Mr. Bennett, someone tried to sign her out today, the teacher said, voice trembling. A woman said she was her aunt. We didn't let her go, but she ran off when we asked for ID. My knees buckled. Sarah sobbed when I told her, clutching Lily so tight I thought she'd bruise her. Hayes went full throttle, grilling the daycare staff, pulling security footage. The woman was blurry, hood up, sunglasses, but her walk was eerily familiar. It's not Cheryl, Hayes said, rewinding the tape. Too young. Sophie's locked up, so who the hell is this? Peterson got a sketch artist in, and the teacher described her. Sharp jaw, blonde hair peeking out, maybe 30. It didn't match anyone we knew. Dad came over that night, pale and fidgety. Lucas, I didn't want to say anything, but Cheryl had a sister. Younger, Naomi. They were tight, real tight. She hated me after the divorce. Blamed you for it, too. My head spun. Why didn't you tell me? I snapped. He shrank back. She dropped off the map years ago. I didn't think she'd care enough to do this. Hayes jumped on it, digging into Naomi. Took him 2 days to find her a drifter, bouncing between Vancouver and the island. A rap sheet full of petty theft and bar fights. Last known address, a trailer park in Duncan, 40 minutes away. Peterson got a warrant, and they raided it that night. Naomi was there, strung out on something, surrounded by photos, me at the grocery store, Sarah at the park, Lily on the daycare swings. A knife lay on the table, next to a stack of those damn letters. She didn't fight when they cuffed her, just laughed, a high, broken sound. You took everything from us, she slurred as they dragged her out. Cheryl's rotting. Sophie's gone, and you're playing house like nothing happened. Hayes watched the body cam footage later, shaking his head. She's a mess, obsessed. Been planning this since Sophie went down. Naomi confessed in interrogation, spilling it all. She'd worshipped Cheryl, saw her as a victim of my Marisa Poppins' perfect family, ruined by a psycho stepmom. Naomi blamed me for tearing them apart, wanted me to suffer like they had. She'd stalked us for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. She got 10 years stalking, attempted kidnapping, the works. Sarah and I didn't sleep for weeks after, but we held tight to each other. Lily was okay, oblivious, babbling away, and that kept us going. Dad stuck around more, guilt eating at him, and I let him. He wasn't my father in the old sense, but he was Lily's poppy, and she lit up when he walked in. Mom was our rock, cooking dinners, singing to Lily, keeping us sane. Hayes became family too, checked in every week. Brought beers and bad jokes. We stayed in Victoria, refused to run. The house was ours, scars and all, and we weren't giving it up. Lily's 3 now, fearless and loud, and Sarah's pregnant again, due in spring. We're naming him Noah, after Sarah's dad, who passed before I met her. The letters stopped, the cameras stay quiet, and I'm starting to trust the quiet again. Dad's renting a place nearby, rebuilding what he can, and I'm letting him try. Therapy's still a lifeline. I've got baggage to unpack, but I'm lighter than I've ever been. Sarah, Lily, Mom, even Hayes, they're my world. And Noah's coming to make it bigger. The past isn't gone, but it's not winning. Not anymore. The seasons in Victoria rolled on, each one stitching our little family tighter together. Lily was 4 now, a tornado of energy with wild curls and a stubborn streak that Sarah swore came from me. Noah arrived right on schedule last spring, a chubby, quiet baby who slept through the night and smiled at everything. The house was a mess of toys and diapers, but it felt full alive in a way I'd never known growing up. Sarah was back to designing, her sketches pinned up around the kitchen, and I'd taken on more responsibility at work, managing a team remotely. Mom was our anchor, always there with a pot of soup or a story for the kids, her condo a second home for Lily's sleepovers. Dad hovered on the edges, closer than before but still careful, like he was afraid to break something fragile. He'd bring wooden trains for Noah or braid Lily's hair, and I'd catch myself softening toward him, though I never said it out loud. Hayes was still around too, a gruff uncle figure who'd show up unannounced with pizza and updates on Naomi's prison stint. She was serving her time quietly, no letters, no trouble, and Sophie's sentence was winding down, but she'd stayed off our radar. Cheryl was a distant memory, fading into the background of a life I'd left behind. We'd built something solid here, a fortress of routines and love, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd outrun the shadows for good. Then the phone rang one gray November afternoon, shattering that illusion. It was Peterson, his voice clipped and heavy. "Lucas, we've got a problem. Sophie's out." My stomach dropped. Out? She had 2 years left. He sighed. "Good behavior. Overcrowded system parole board let her loose last week. Thought you should know?" I gripped the counter, the room tilting. "Where is she?" I asked. "Calgary last we checked," he said. "She's on a tight leash, weekly check-ins. No contact order with you. But stay sharp." I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the wall, the old fear clawing back. Sarah walked in, Noah on her hip, and saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting him in his high chair. I told her, keeping my voice low so Lily wouldn't hear from the living room. Her jaw tightened. "We're not doing this again," she said, fierce. "She comes near us, I'll end her myself." I almost smiled. Sarah's fire was one reason I loved her, but the worry stayed lodged in my chest. I called Hayes, and he was at the house by nightfall, scarfing down leftovers while he mapped out a plan. "Sophie's broke, no job, no friends left," he said, chewing. "Parole ties her to Calgary, but she's got a history of slipping through cracks. I'll keep tabs." He set up alerts with his contacts, checked her social media. Nothing yet, just silence. Peterson sent a patrol car by our street that night, a quiet reassurance, but I didn't sleep. I sat up, scrolling through the camera feeds, every creak of the house sounding like footsteps. Sarah found me at 3 a.m., bleary-eyed on the couch. "You can't live like this," she said, tugging me back to bed. "We've got Hayes, Peterson, the whole damn neighborhood watching. She's not that stupid." I nodded, but the what-ifs kept spinning. A month passed, tense but uneventful. Lily started preschool, chattering about her new friends, and Noah took his first wobbly steps, crashing into everything with a grin. Christmas loomed, and Mom was in full holiday mode, dragging us to cut a tree from a farm up island. Dad tagged along, hauling the pine back to the truck while Lily bossed him around. It was normal, almost too normal, and I let myself relax, just a little. Then Hayes called. "Got a hit," he said. No preamble. "Sophie's off the grid. Missed her parole check-in yesterday. Calgary PD's looking, but she's gone." My mouth went dry. "Gone where?" I asked. "No clue," he said. "Could be anywhere. I'm heading to Calgary now. Sit tight." I told Sarah, and we locked down no playdates, no trips to the park. Mom took the kids to her place, turning it into a game so they wouldn't sense the panic. Hayes called daily, chasing leads Sophie's old haunts, a sighting at a bus station, a stolen credit card traced to a gas stop in Kamloops. She was moving, and every step felt closer. Peterson stationed an officer outside our house, a rookie named Chen, who sipped coffee and waved at the neighbors like it was no big deal. Then, 5 days after she vanished, the power cut out. It was 9 p.m., rain hammering the roof, and the house plunged into black. Sarah froze mid-story, Lily's book still in her lap. "Storm?" she whispered. I checked the window streetlights were on, neighbors' houses lit, just us. I grabbed the bat, heart thudding, and checked the breaker tripped, but not by weather. Footprints tracked mud across the porch. I called Chen, who radioed for backup, his flashlight sweeping the yard. Hayes was still in Calgary, but he patched in over the phone. "Get out," he barked. "Take Sarah and Lily, go to your mom's now." I didn't argue. We bundled Lily into her coat, her eyes wide, and bolted for the car. Chen covered us, gun drawn, as headlights flared down the street. A figure stepped out Sophie, gaunt and soaked, a crowbar dangling from her hand. "You don't get to win!" she screamed, lunging toward us. Chen tackled her, wrestling her to the ground as she thrashed, spitting curses. Backup screeched in, cuffing her while she howled about revenge, about me stealing her life. Sarah clutched Lily, sobbing, and I stood there, shaking, watching her get hauled away. She'd violated parole, breaking the no-contact order, fleeing, assault. They locked her up again, 10 years this time, no early outs. Hayes pieced it together later. She'd hitchhiked across BC, fueled by rage and cheap booze, planning to torch our house with us in it. The crowbar was for the windows she'd cut the power to trap us. Chen got a medal, and I got a lifetime of nightmares. We stayed at Mom's for a week, letting the house air out its ghosts. Dad was there every day, quiet but steady, fixing meals and rocking Noah to sleep. "I should have seen her coming," he said once, voice breaking. I didn't reply, just handed him a beer and let it sit. We went back home eventually, repainted the walls, added floodlights. Lily bounced back fast, oblivious to how close we'd come, but Sarah and I carried it heavier. Therapy doubled, for both of us, and Hayes stuck around till spring, a shadow we didn't mind. Sophie's gone for good this time, and Naomi's not due out for years. Cheryl's a non-issue, wasting away somewhere irrelevant. Dad's closer now, moved to Victoria permanently, a block from Mom. He's not my best friend, but he's Lily and Noah's Poppy, and that's enough for me to keep the door cracked open. Lily's 5 next month, planning her own party with a pirate theme. Noah's toddling everywhere, babbling dada like it's his job. Sarah's designing again, her spark reigniting, and I'm breathing easier, day by day. The past keeps knocking, but we're done answering. This life, messy, loud, ours is all I need. Victoria's winters are mild, but this one felt colder, sharper, like the air itself was holding its breath. Lily turned 5 in March. Her pirate party, a chaotic hit, kids in eye patches running wild. Sarah dressed as a captain, barking orders with a grin. Noah, at 2, stumbled around with a plastic sword, giggling every time he fell. Mom baked a cake shaped like a ship, and Dad manned the treasure hunt, his laugh echoing through the backyard. It was one of those days that felt untouchable, a bubble of joy I wanted to freeze forever. Work was steady, Sarah's business was thriving, and we'd even started saving for a bigger place, maybe something with a view of the Straits. The threats, the shadows, they'd faded into background noise, a story we told ourselves we'd outgrown. I should have known better. It started small, easy to miss. A missed call from an unknown number, no voicemail. Then another, 2 days later. I brushed it off telemarketers, wrong dials, but when the third came at midnight, waking Noah, I blocked it. Sarah raised an eyebrow over breakfast. "You okay?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Yeah," I lied, just annoyed. She didn't push, but I saw the flicker of worry in her eyes. That afternoon, picking Lily up from preschool, her teacher pulled me aside. "A man asked about her today. she said, voice low. Said he was family, but I didn't recognize him. He left when I pressed him. My skin prickled. What did he look like? I asked. She shrugged. Tall, scruffy, maybe 40. Wore a cap, couldn't see much. I thanked her, scooped Lily up, and called Hayes on the drive home. He was at the house in an hour, pacing the living room while Lily colored upstairs. Sophie's still inside, he confirmed, scrolling his phone. Naomi, too. Cheryl's a wreck, couldn't organize a sandwich, let alone this. You got any new enemies? I shook my head, but the unease was back, a cold weight in my gut. What about the twins' old crew? I asked. They had friends, shady ones. Hayes nodded. Possible. I'll poke around. He left to make calls, and I told Sarah. Keeping it vague, someone snooping. Nothing solid. She didn't buy it. This again? She snapped, her voice tight. I thought we were done. I pulled her close, promising we'd handle it, but I didn't know how. The next morning, our mailbox was trashed, splintered wood, letters scattered across the lawn. Taped to the wreckage was a photo of Lily and Noah at the park, taken from a distance. No note, just the image, grainy but clear. Sarah saw it first and lost it, tears streaming as she clutched the kids. I called Peterson, who rolled up with Chen in tow, both grim. This is escalating, Peterson said, bagging the photo. We'll canvass the neighbors, check cameras. Hayes came back that night, his scar twitching as he laid out what he'd found. Tracked down one of Sophie's old boyfriends, Travis. Rough guy, in and out of jail. Word is, he's pissed about her sentence. Thinks you snitched her out. Last seen in Nanaimo a week ago. My head spun. I never met him, I said. Hayes shrugged. Doesn't matter. Sophie's got a knack for twisting stories. Peterson pulled Travis's file assault, theft, a restraining order from an ex. No hard proof he was in Victoria, but the timing fit. Chen staked out the house that night, parked across the street, while Hayes crashed on our couch again. Sarah barely spoke, her eyes red, and I felt helpless, watching our life crack under the strain. 2 days later, Lily's preschool called again. Someone slashed the tires on the playground van, the principal said. Left a note, tell Bennett he's next. I raced over, heart pounding, and found Lily safe but shaken, clinging to her teacher. The note was scrawled in black marker, stuffed under a wiper. Peterson met me there, swearing under his breath. This guy's not subtle, he said. We're closing in. That night, the power cut again. No storm, no warning, just darkness. Sarah grabbed the kids, and I snatched the bat, adrenaline surging. The cameras were dead, same as before. Chen radioed from outside, his voice crackling. I see someone backyard. I heard tires squeal, then shouting, and ran to the window. Chen was sprinting across the lawn, chasing a figure in a hoodie. They vaulted the fence, disappearing into the trees as backup roared up. Peterson stormed in minutes later, soaked and furious. Lost him, he growled. But Chen got a look matches Travis. We've got an APB out. Sarah rocked Noah, her face pale, while Lily whimpered in my arms. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the rage boiling up. Hayes took over, calling in favors, tracking Travis's known hangouts. By dawn, he had a lead a dive motel in Sydney, 20 minutes north. Peterson raided it with a SWAT team, kicking down the door to find Travis holed up with a duffel bag of knives and gasoline cans. He didn't go quietly swung at an officer, got tackled, and cussed me out as they dragged him off. You're dead, Bennett, he screamed, spit flying. Sophie's gonna laugh when I gut you. They charged him with everything stalking, vandalism, attempted arson. He'd been Sophie's errand boy, fueled by her prison rants about me, planning to burn us out for revenge. He got 15 years, locked up tight in Kent Institution. We didn't sleep right for weeks. Sarah insisted on moving, and I didn't argue this time. We sold the house fast, too many ghosts, and bought a place in Oak Bay, gated, quiet, with a view of the water. Mom followed, trading her condo for a bungalow nearby. Dad helped us pack, silent but there, hauling boxes like pennants. Hayes stuck around till we were settled, then took a rare vacation, promising to be back if we whistled. Peterson retired that summer, handing Chen the reins, said he'd had enough excitement. Travis's trial was quick, his guilty plea a small mercy. Sophie sent a letter from prison after, gloating that she'd won by scaring us. I burned it, didn't tell Sarah. Lily's 6 now, fearless again, ruling kindergarten with her pirate swagger. Noah's 3, obsessed with trucks, leaving tire tracks on every surface. Sarah's designing a kid's book, her art blooming, and I'm mentoring at work, steady as ever. Dad's a regular Sundays at our place, grilling burgers, teaching Noah to kick a ball. I don't call him Dad out loud, but I don't flinch when Lily does. Mom's knitting blankets for the kids, her laugh a constant. The new house feels safe, ours, and the cameras hum quietly, watching nothing but the wind. Sophie's locked away, Travis too, and Cheryl's a whisper no one hears. We're not running not anymore. This is us, scarred but standing, and I'll fight like hell to keep it that way. Oak Bay was our reset, a clean slate carved out of necessity. The house sat on a quiet street, all cedar and glass, with a gate that clicked shut like a promise. Lily ruled the backyard, her pirate flag flapping from a makeshift fort, while Noah turned the living room into a racetrack for his toy trucks. Sarah's book took off her illustrations of scrappy kids, and talking whales hit the shelves last fall, and she glowed every time a fan emailed. I was leading projects at work now, the team leaning on me, and it felt good to be steady for someone. Mom's bungalow was a 5-minute walk, her kitchen always warm with bread or stew, and Dad was a fixture Sundays grilling, weekdays dropping off tools or books for the kids. He'd earned a corner of our lives, not the center, but enough. Hayes checked in monthly, his gravelly voice a comfort, and Chen kept the neighborhood on his radar, a quiet shadow we didn't need, but appreciated. Lily hit 7 this spring, sharp and bold, her pirate phase giving way to soccer-kicking goals like she was born for it. Noah, at 4, was her shadow, mimicking her every move with a grin that melted us. Sarah was pregnant again, unexpected but welcome, due in winter, and we were already tossing around names, laughing about surviving 3. The house stretched to fit us, walls echoing with their noise, and I thought we'd finally outpaced the past. It was a Thursday when that illusion cracked. I was late at the office, finishing a call, when Sarah texted, "Come home now. Something's wrong." No details, just that, and my gut twisted. I sped back, the coastal road blurring, and found her on the porch, arms crossed, face pale. "Look," she said, shoving a crumpled paper at me. It was a drawing crude, done in crayon of our house, flames licking the roof, stick figures labeled Lucas, Sarah, Lily, Noah. A scrawl at the bottom read, "Burn it all." My hands shook as I stared, the kids' voices drifting from inside, oblivious. "Where'd this come from?" I asked, voice low. "Mailbox," she said. "No envelope, just this." I called Hayes first. He was on a ferry in an hour. Then Chen, who rolled up with a patrol car, his calm fraying when he saw it. "This isn't a kid's prank," he said, bagging it. "Too specific." Sarah's eyes were steel. "Who's left?" she demanded. "Sophie? Travis? Naomi?" I shook my head. Prison records had them all accounted for. "Someone new," I muttered, the thought chilling me. Hayes arrived at dawn, scar glinting as he tore into the case. He pulled files, called contacts, ruled out the usual suspects. Sophie was still caged, Travis in solitary after a fight, Naomi medicated and monitored. "Could be a copycat," he said, pacing. "Your story's out there, Reddit, news clips. People get obsessed." Chen sent the drawing to forensics crayon wax. No prints, paper from any dollar store. The next day, our car tires were slashed, all 4, deep and deliberate. Chen found a nail nearby, with LB scratched into it, my initials. Sarah pulled the kids from school, kept them home, and I worked remote, eyes on the cameras. Hayes slept in the guest room, a shotgun by the bed, and Dad started staying over too, his old hunting rifle dusted off. "I'm not losing you again," he said, voice rough. And I didn't argue. A week later, the garage caught fire. It was 2 a.m., smoke alarms screaming, and I bolted outside, Sarah herding the kids to Mom's down the street. Flames chewed the walls, gas cans tossed inside empty, but the intent was clear. Chen's team put it out, but the damage was done. Tools gone, Sarah's old sketches ash. Hayes found a matchbook from a bar in Langford, 15 miles away, and took off to chase it. Chen posted 2 officers at the house, grim-faced, while Peterson came out of retirement to consult, his growl unchanged. "This bastard's toying with you," he said. "We'll get him." That night, a brick crashed through Lily's window, glass shattering over her bed. She screamed, unhurt but terrified, and Sarah broke down, clutching her while I grabbed the note tied to it. "Next time it's her." I lost it, rage, fear, all of it boiling over. Hayes came back with a name. Kyle Renner, a drifter who'd been at that Langford bar, mouthing off about teaching a rich prick a lesson. Ex-con, paranoid, hooked on true crime forums, ours included. He'd latched onto Sophie's tale, saw me as some villain to punish. Chen tracked him to a squat in Esquimalt, a shack stinking of gas and rot. They stormed it at dawn. Kyle fought, knife in hand, but took a bullet to the leg and went down. His walls were plastered with our lives. Photos, maps, a timeline back to Cheryl. He'd planned the fire as a warm-up, wanted us trapped inside next time. He got life, no parole, raving in court about justice. We rebuilt the garage, moved Lily's room, added steel shutters. Sarah miscarried a week after stress, the doctor said, and we grieved quietly, holding the kids tighter. Lily's 8 now, back to soccer, her laugh a lifeline. Noah's 5, building forts, asking why we have so many locks. Sarah's drawing again, slower, healing. Dad's a rock, moved in for months, cooks breakfast, teaches Lily to fish. Mom's fierce, guarding us all. Hayes is family, Chen too, their vigilance our shield. Kyle's gone, the others locked away, but I check the gates every night, bat by the bed. We're still here, battered but whole, and I'll die before I let that change. The new normal in Oak Bay settled over us like a heavy coat, warm but tight, something we wore out of habit. Lily turned 9 last month, taller now, her soccer cleats muddying the porch daily. Noah's 6, a chatterbox with a knack for dismantling anything with screws, his toy trucks evolving into contraptions I can't name. Sarah's art came back in waves, her latest project a mural for the kids' school, bright fish, and forests sprawling across brick. I'd taken a step back at work, delegating more, wanting time with them over late-night calls. Mom's bungalow stayed our refuge, her tea kettle whistling through every crisis, and Dad was permanent now. His apartment lease lapsed, and he'd claimed our spare room, frying bacon for breakfast like it was his job. Hayes was a constant, popping in with coffee and updates, while Chen's patrols were as regular as the tides. Kyle's life sentence held, Sophie's term stretched with new infractions, and Travis and Naomi faded to irrelevance. We'd patched the cracks, garage rebuilt, shutters up, cameras humming, and I thought we'd finally locked the chaos out. It was a crisp April evening when the first sign hit. Noah founded a doll, Lily's old one, gutted and strung up on the oak tree out front. Its plastic eyes dangled, a rope tight around its neck. He ran in screaming, and Sarah went white, scooping him up while I cut it down. No note, no marks, just the doll, left like a warning. I called Chen, who arrived with a frown, bagging it for evidence. "Could be kids," he said, but his tone didn't match his words. Hayes was there by nightfall, his jaw set. "This isn't random," he growled. "Too personal. We checked the cameras, nothing, just a glitch at 3 a.m., 5 minutes of black." Sarah's hands shook as she tucked the kids in, and I saw the old fear creep back into her eyes. "What if it's not over?" she whispered. I didn't answer, couldn't. The next day, our front door was scratched deep, jagged lines spelling pay. Chen's team dusted for prints, found none, and Hayes dug into Kyle's prison contacts. "He's got no reach," he said, frustrated. "Someone else is picking up the thread." Lily stopped playing outside, her soccer ball gathering dust, and Noah clung to us, asking why bad people kept coming. I hated that he knew to ask. Dad took to sitting on the porch with his rifle, a silent sentry, while Mom baked to keep her hands busy. 2 nights later, the phone rang, unknown number. I answered, heart pounding, and heard breathing, slow and deliberate, then a click. It came again the next night, and the next, always silent, always ending fast. Chen traced it burner phones, bought cash in Duncan, dead ends. A week later, the school called. Lily's backpack had been stolen from her cubby, returned an hour later with a knife inside, small, rusted, but sharp. She didn't see it, thank God. But the principal locked down the building, and I raced over, Sarah behind me with Noah. Chen met us, face grim, and pulled the security tapes. A figure hooded, wiry slipped in during recess, gone before anyone noticed. Male, maybe, Chen said, squinting at the grainy feed. Hard to tell. Hayes watched it 10 times, cursing under his breath. This is coordinated, he said. They know your routines. Sarah snapped. Then change them. We can't live like this. She was right, but I didn't know where to start. That night, the backyard fence went up in flames. Not big dry brush and gasoline, quick to flare and die, but the message was clear. Chen's officers doused it, found a lighter tossed nearby, cheap and unmarked. Dad grabbed his gun and stormed the yard, shouting into the dark, but no one answered. Hayes called in a favor a buddy with the RCMP and got a surveillance van parked 2 streets over, watching 24/7. The kids slept in our room now, Lily curled against Sarah, Noah clutching my arm. I didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling, bat in reach, every creak a threat. Morning brought a delivery box, no label, left on the step. Inside was a photo of us at Mom's last Sunday, eating pie, laughing. A red X slashed over my face. Sarah sobbed, and I called Hayes, voice breaking. He tore into it, cross-referencing every loose end. This isn't Sophie's style, he said. Too subtle. Travis is too dumb, Naomi's too doped up. Kyle's locked tight. Then Dad spoke up, quiet, from the corner. It's my fault, he said, eyes down. Cheryl's cousin Mark, I forgot him. He was at the wedding, hated me after the divorce, blamed you for ruining her. My stomach dropped. Why now? I demanded. Dad shrugged, ashamed. He was overseas oil rigs. Maybe he's back. Hayes ran it, Mark Delaney, 45, roughneck, off the grid for years. Last pinged in Vancouver 6 months ago, fresh off a stint in the Gulf. No record, but a temper, according to old bar fights. Chen and Hayes tracked him to a flophouse in Saanich, 10 miles away. They hit it at dawn. Mark was there, drunk, a shrine of photos and clippings about us on the wall. He swung a bat, missed, and went down under Chen's tackle. You little shit, he snarled as they cuffed him. You killed her, Cheryl's dead because of you. She wasn't Hayes checked. She was alive, just broken. But Mark believed it, twisted by years of grudge. He'd been behind it all, the doll, the knife, the fire working alone, fueled by hate and cheap whiskey. He got 12 years, assault and arson, no chance to wiggle free. We didn't move this time, stayed put, fortified. Lily's back to soccer, cautious but kicking. Noah's building again, asking less about bad people. Sarah's mural's done, a quiet triumph, and she's painting for herself now, small canvases of us. Dad's glued to us, gilt his shadow, and I let him stay closer than ever. Mom's steel, holding us up. Hayes and Chen are our guard dogs, ever watchful. Mark's locked away, the others too, and I check the locks nightly, bat still close. We're here, bruised but breathing, and I'll keep us that way, no matter what comes next. Oak Bay held us together, its quiet streets a stubborn stand against the storms that kept blowing in. Lily's 10 now, all legs and determination, her soccer games drawing crowds of classmates who cheer her name. Noah's 7, a tinkerer with a wild grin, his latest project a robot made of scavenged gears and duct tape. Sarah's canvases multiplied portraits of the kids, of us, hung in every room, her way of claiming this life back. I'd scaled work to part-time, coaching Lily's team on weekends, needing the air more than the office. Mom's a constant, her bungalow our second kitchen, and Dad's rooted in our spare room, a steady hand with Noah's homework or Lily's braids. Hayes drifts in and out, his scar a badge of loyalty, and Chen's a fixture, his patrol car a silent promise. Mark's sentence stuck. Sophie's stretched thin with fights. Travis and Naomi faded to nothing. Cheryl's alive, barely, a footnote we ignore. The house stood firm, new locks, steel gates, cameras sharp, and I thought we'd finally built a wall too high for trouble to climb. It was a warm June night when the first crack appeared. Sarah and I were on the porch, sipping beer after the kids crashed, when the motion lights flared. I checked the feed shadow, quick, darting past the garage. Gone before I could zoom. Raccoon? Sarah asked, hopeful. I nodded, wanting to believe it, but my pulse said otherwise. Next morning, the garage door was ajar, nothing taken, just open, a hinge bent. Chen came by, squinting at it. Could be wind, he said, but I'll sweep the block. Hayes wasn't convinced when I called. Too clean, he grunted. Someone's testing you. We tightened up, reset the cameras, checked the gates, but it felt like waiting for a punch you can't see. 2 days later, Noah's robot vanished from the porch. He cried, confused, and I found it later smashed, gears scattered across the driveway. A note was taped to its cracked shell. You don't deserve this. Sarah's face hardened, and she grabbed the kids, locking us in while I called Hayes. He roared in from Nanaimo, Chen on his heels, and they combed the footage, another glitch. 10 minutes of nothing, right at dusk. Same M.O., Hayes said, fists clenched. They're back. But who? Mark was caged, the others too. Chen upped patrols, and Dad took to pacing the yard, rifle slung over his shoulder like a soldier on watch. Lily stopped sleeping alone, curling up with Noah in our bed, her brave front crumbling. Sarah painted less, her brush idle, and I coached with one eye on the sidelines, waiting. A week later, the school's playground burned. Not all of it, just the slide Lily loved, melted to a puddle of plastic overnight. The fire chief called it arson gasoline, deliberate, and Chen pulled me aside. Found this, he said, holding a charred scrap. LB scratched into metal, my initials again. Sarah lost it, yelling we should leave, but I dug in. They don't get to win, I snapped, angrier than I meant. Hayes traced the gas stolen from a shed 3 streets over. No prints, no leads. That night, the phone rang unknown. Same old trick. I answered, heard a laugh, low and rough, then static. Chen traced it another burner. Bought in Sydney, gone cold. They're close, Hayes said, and they're pissed. The next hit was personal. Mom woke to her car, gutted windows smashed, seats slashed, traitor carved into the hood. She called me sobbing, and I raced over. Dad behind me, his face dark. Chen's team swarmed, but the street cameras were spray-painted black. Hayes found a witness, an old guy who saw a figure, short, hooded, limping away at dawn. Not Mark, he muttered. Someone new. Sarah pulled the kids from school again, and we holed up, blinds down, lights low. Lily drew pirates in silence. Noah tinkered with scraps, and Sarah's hands shook as she cooked. Dad cleaned his rifle. Mom baked, and I stared at the feeds, bat in my lap. Hayes slept in the van now, Chen's officers at every corner. But it wasn't enough. Then the package came, brown paper, no address, left at Mom's gate. She brought it to us trembling, and I opened it. A photo of Cheryl, younger, smiling, her face scratched out. A note underneath. She's dead. You're next. Hayes checked Cheryl wasn't dead, still rotting in a care home, but the lie didn't matter. This was blood, family, someone tied to her. He dug deeper, found a name. Lisa, Cheryl's niece, Mark's sister. Mid-30s, off the radar since the divorce, a drifter with a grudge. Last seen in Victoria 2 years back, working bars, unstable. She's the limp, Hayes said, slamming a photo down blurry, but her short blonde favoring one leg. Chen issued a warrant, and they hit every dive in town. They found her at a dockside motel, 3 a.m., reeking of gin and smoke. Lisa didn't run, sat there, smirking, a lighter in her hand. Walls plastered with our lives. Lily's games, Noah's preschool, Sarah's mural. You killed her, she slurred, meaning Cheryl's spirit, her family. I'm finishing it. She'd done it all doll, robot, fire, car alone, obsessed, a one-woman war. Chen hauled her in, and she spat at the glass in interrogation, confessing with glee. 15 years, locked tight, no parole. Hayes watched the tape, shaking his head. She's worse than Cheryl, he said. Pure hate. We stayed put, rebuilt a new garage door, playground fundraised, Mom's car fixed, Lily's back on the field, fierce, Noah's robots hum again, and Sarah's painting dark seas now, but hers. Dad's a wall, Mom's a flame, and Hayes and Chen are our steel. Lisa's gone, the rest buried, and I lock up tight, bat close. We're scarred, loud, alive, and no one's taking that away. Oak Bay clung to us, its calm facade a thin veil over the tension we couldn't shake. Lily's 11 now, a force on the soccer pitch, her ponytail whipping as she scores, her grin fierce and unbroken. Noah's 8, a wiry dreamer, his robots evolving into clanking beasts he builds in the garage with Dad. Sarah's seas darkened her latest paintings, stormy, jagged, sold out at a gallery show last month. Her quiet triumph. I coach full-time now, traded the office for grass and whistles, needing the sun on my face. Mom's a rock, her bungalow our safe harbor, and Dad's cemented here, his tools clutter our shed, his voice a low hum with the kids. Hayes is our shadow, Chen our shield, their vigilance a rhythm we live by. Lisa's locked deep, Sophie's fading, Travis and Naomi ghosts, Cheryl a husk we don't mention. The house stands gates bolted, cameras keen, and I thought we'd armored it enough. It was a foggy October dawn when the quiet broke. I was up early, coffee in hand, when the doorbell chimed sharp, insistent. No one. Rang at 5 a.m. I checked the camera, a figure, hooded, hunched, clutching something. My gut clenched. I grabbed the bat, cracked the door, and saw a kid maybe 16, skinny, eyes wild. You Bennett? He rasped, voice cracking. I nodded, tense. He thrust a bag at me, tattered, heavy, and bolted into the mist. I slammed the door, called Hayes, and tore it open. Inside, photos of us Lily at practice, Noah at school, Sarah at the gallery, each slashed with red marker. A note, block letters. They won't stop. Hayes roared in, Chen behind, and we poured over it, no prints, no clues, just fear. Who's they? Sarah demanded, her voice sharp as she cradled Noah, woken by the noise. Lily peeked from the stairs, pale, and I sent her back with a forced smile. Hayes shook his head. Kid's a runner, someone's pulling strings. Chen traced the bag thrift store reject. Useless, but the photos were fresh, taken days ago. This is inside, Hayes said, grim. Someone knows you cold. We locked down school canceled. Blinds shut, Dad pacing with his rifle. Mom took the kids to her place, her calm a lifeline, while Hayes and Chen hunted the kid. They found him by noon, Jake, a dropout, nabbed at a bus stop, trembling. I didn't want to, he stammered in custody. They paid me cash, no names, said it was a prank. Chen pressed, who's they? Jake didn't know, just pointed to a bar in Colwood, where he'd met a guy, tall, scarred, quiet. Hayes hit the bar that night, undercover, nursing a beer. Took him an hour to spot him mid-40s, scar across his nose, sipping whiskey alone. Hayes tailed him to a trailer off Souk Road, ramshackle, lights dim. Chen rated it at dawn. Guy was Paul, ex-con, linked to Travis years back. No photos, no proof, just a burner phone and a map with our street circled. Paul clammed up, smirked through questioning, but Chen booked him stalking. Intimidation. He's a grunt, Hayes said, frustrated. Someone's above him. Sarah's eyes blazed. How many more? She snapped. I had no answer, just held her. The kids' laughter from Mom's a distant echo. 2 days later, the school's field flooded pipes burst, deliberate, water reeking of gas. Chen found a valve tampered, a tag tied to it. LBRUNSOUT. Lily's games canceled, her team scattered, and she cried, asking why we couldn't be normal. Noah built quieter, his robots still, and Sarah stopped painting, her hands idle. Hayes dug into Paul Paroli, petty jobs, no family, but a call log to a number in Prince George, active last week. Chen traced it another burner, but bought near a halfway house. Cheryl's? I asked, dreading it. Hayes shook his head. She's a vegetable stroke last year. This is someone else. Dad spoke up, voice low. Her brother Rick. Older, mean. Cut ties when she married me. Hated us all. My jaw tightened. He's alive? Dad nodded. Last I heard, up north. Hayes and Chen chased it Rick Delaney, 60, grizzled, off-grid since the 90s, surfaced in Prince George a year back. Bar fights, threats, rants about family betrayal. They hit his shack at midnight remote, stinking of oil and rage. Rick fought, swung a crowbar, took 2 officers down before they pinned him. His walls screamed at photos, clippings, a shrine to Cheryl, Sophie, Mark, Lisa, all pinned with Bennett dyes. He'd orchestrated it Paul the Muscle, Jake the Pawn, driven by decades of venom, blaming me for their fall. You stole her life! He roared, cuffed, spit flying. I'll bury you. 20 years, no parole, locked in Metski. We didn't budge, stayed, rebuilt the field, reinforced the house. Lily's 12, scoring again, Noah's 9, robots humming. Sarah paints storms, sells them fast, and I coach, breathe, live. Dad's our wall, Mom our heart, Hayes and Chen our steel. Rick's gone, the chain broken, and I lock up tight, bat close. We're here, raw and real, and nothing's tearing us down. Oak Bay had weathered us, its roots tangled deep in our bones, and we weren't letting go. Lily's 12 now, a whirlwind on the soccer field, her goals a defiant roar against the years that tried to break us. Noah's 9, his robots sprawling across the garage, a quiet genius blooming in his hands. Sarah's storm sold out again, galleries clamored for her jagged seas, her brush a weapon she'd mastered. I coach steady, the whistle my anchor, the kids' cheers pulling me back to solid ground. Mom's bungalow stayed our haven, her voice a balm, and Dad was our bedrock, his hands rough but sure, fixing what broke, guarding what mattered. Hayes and Chen were our sentinels, their shadows long and loyal, and Rick's 20-year sentence slammed the door on the last of Cheryl's kin, Paul locked tight, Jake scared straight, the chain shattered. The house stood unyielding gates barred, cameras alive, and we'd carved our piece from the wreckage, daring the world to test it again. It was a crisp December dusk when the final thread unraveled. Snow dusted the yard, rare for the coast, and Lily and Noah were outside, shrieking as they pelted Dad with snowballs. Sarah and I watched from the porch, her hand in mine, warm despite the chill. The phone rang inside sharp, unfamiliar, and I tensed, the old reflex kicking in. Hayes answered it, his growl cutting through the laughter as he stepped out. It's done, he said, pocketing his cell. Rick's dead heart attack in his cell last night. No pulse, no fight. I stared, waiting for the catch, but Hayes just nodded. Checked myself, prison doc confirmed. He's gone. Sarah exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and squeezed my hand tighter. All of them? She asked, voice soft. All of them, Hayes said, firm. Cheryl's a shell, Sophie's a lifer after her last stunt, Travis and Naomi rotting, Lisa and Mark buried in years, Paul and Rick finished. It's over. I didn't speak, just pulled Sarah close, her head against my chest, and watched the kids tackle Dad into the snow, his laugh booming. Chen drove by later, waved from his cruiser, and Hayes cracked a rare smile, sipping Mom's cocoa as she bustled out with mugs. No letters came, no shadows loomed, no glitches flickered the screens. Christmas hit hard and bright, Lily hung lights. Noah rigged a sleigh from scrap, and Sarah painted a star for the tree, her colors soft for once. Dad carved the turkey. Mom sang off-key, And we ate until we groaned, the table loud with us. Hayes toasted quiet nights, Chen joined for pie, and I locked the door that night, bat stashed away, its weight unneeded. Spring brought Lily's 13th birthday, teenage now, fierce and funny, her team champs under my whistle. Noah's 10, his robots winning school fairs, his grin my mirror. Sarah's expecting again, planned this time, due in fall, a girl we'll call Grace, for what we've earned. Her art's everywhere, museums now, not just walls, and I coach, build, breathe. Dad's gray but solid, teaching Noah knots, kicking balls with Lily. Mom's our son, her story's endless, and Hayes and Chen fade to friends, their guns shelved, their calls just chatter. The house is ours, scars faded, gates open some days, and the past's a shadow we don't chase. Rick's death closed it, the last lock clicking shut. No one's left to hate us, no grudge lingers to strike. Lily dances in the yard, Noah dreams loud, Sarah paints life, and I stand with them, whole. Dad's my father again, quiet in the word, and Mom's our glue. We're here raw, real, unbroken, and the fight's done. Grace kicks inside Sarah, our future, and I sleep now, windows cracked, the bat retired. Oak Bay holds us, and we hold it back, free at last.